Okay, I'm Wendy Ulfers, as you can see from the screen, and Sarah asked me to co-host with her and provide the welcome and the thanks for participating because we're here to celebrate 1 year of publication of Unplugged Voices and curated and edited by Sara Frances, as you all know. Currently, the book has won 6 awards so far and is a finalist for 2 more coming up. And we'd like everyone to participate in whatever way they would like, either by asking questions. You can use the chat box, by telling a story and talking. But when you're not speaking, everyone please mute yourself. And if you raise your hand or put a question in the box, we'll call on you and ask you to unmute. I'm going to give you just a brief synopsis of why I'm part of this group. I've been a self-published story writer for the past 10 years. We were living overseas for 31 years, repatriated back to Colorado in 2018. And I've been publishing my stories on my own website, a blog called A Taste of Mind. Sarah came across one of my articles that was written about El Rincon, the oldest trading post in Taos, and asked me to expand the story and elaborate and change the perspective a bit and to include it in the first volume of Unplugged Voices. So I did. And the current owner is the grandson of the man who started the trading post more than 100 years ago. So I focused my current story on Estevan and his development as a silversmith and the curator of the museum and the trading post. So let's see. Oh, let's talk about why we're here today. So we're really here to talk about the importance of verbal storytelling. Why is this important? Why is history important to share? Why is being curious important? Learning? And why are we just reminding ourselves of how rich and varied the human experience is? So I hope everyone will share some of their perspective or ask questions to anyone that's here on the panel. But in the meantime, I'm turning it over to Sara Frances, the curator, editor, designer, cover designer, illustrator, photographer, and publisher extraordinaire of Unplugged Voices. And just know that she put in thousands and thousands of hours of labor and love into this work of art. So, Sarah, tell us about the awards that the book has currently won and what's coming up next.
Well, it's really been totally cool. And I have to say that this is both an I and a we, because of course I curated it and I designed it and published it and did all of those things that, well, a volunteer does. But the we is all of you, the storytelling part of it. And of course, some of you are prospective storytellers for book 2. And that's, of course, what is so important, is that this tremendous outpouring of interest in short memoirs, storytelling, is not going to quit. This is universal. We are the community. We are the grassroots. We are the expansion of facts, figures, dates. We are the experiences that create the body of knowledge for the next generation. And of course, that's why it's so important. In all honesty, I didn't know I was going to start this project when I published my own photographic memoir of northern New Mexico. That Obviously, that was a long time coming, 60 years worth of it to be exact. And then I found out that everybody has a story to tell. Well, go figure. Of course they do. And then I realized that these were stories that would never get heard. And we really needed to collect them and to begin putting these together, particularly of the West, where we're somehow different in the West. I don't know exactly what it is, and I hope maybe some of you can add your ideas, but we've all gravitated here, most of us from someplace else, not like my husband, who's third generation Coloradan. almost everybody is an import. And we came and we loved it and we stayed. And we're part of it now. And that's what's so important. And so I started this project. I didn't realize it was going to be kind of a second career, a life's work. And yet that's what it's turning out to be. So as far as the awards, we've won 3 design awards, which obviously accrues to me personally for being able to learn this very complex image and text book making procedure and how to get it published. But the rest of them are all about the content. People tell me that they have the book in their hands, they open it, and they can't put it down. That every day there's something new that they read. And I myself, I find that now that I look back through the book, I say, oh, I didn't remember that. What a story. And it's something you can go back to again and again. And of course, the fun is having the illustrations with all the articles. So the latest award that we just won was a silver Benjamin Franklin. That's from the Independent Book Publishers of America Association. And they tell me that their contest this year had 1,800 books. Now, of course, not all in our category, which is a coffee table, very special book, but there must have been a great many. And so it's really that's high honor. And we are also up as a finalist for the grand award from the Eric Hoffer Book Prize, and for we're a finalist for the Colorado Humanities Book, again in a category of coffee table or anthology. And those will be awarded later this year, and we don't know yet. And we hope also to get an award. We've competed for the Colorado for the New Mexico Arizona Book Award, but we don't know anything about that one just yet. So the purpose here is to just generate the ideas between all of you, and I'm hoping you can converse just a bit between yourselves and about how we're going to find people for book number 2. And Corinne, my wonderful longtime friend, publisher of, what is it, 11 books now that you have written, had a whole bunch of suggestions yesterday that are wonderful. So this is a thing that it reaches out like an octopus. We find a friend of a friend of a friend, and they all have something great to talk about. And so that's one of our very important things to say. And the second thing is to urge anyone who has like 2 minutes to put a review on Amazon, put a review on Goodreads, because that's where people go for advice of what to read. Okay, so at this point, I've told you about how the project came about. And if I might, may I call upon my wonderful friend, Michelle Potter from Taos, to lead us off with the thoughts of how she became involved, the circuitous route, and how much fun it's been to become friends over this project.
Yeah, it's been great fun. I'm really happy to be part of this thing. And for me, it started, well, I do write, and I've been working on a memoir of 3 generations of my family for about 5 years and trying to get it down the pike. But I'm also a photographer, and one of the things that drew me to this is the book is so full of visual material and stories. And I see that many of the folks in this are not actually so-called writers. And I think that's part of the delight of it all. And it happened for me because a friend of mine here in Taos, Lori Pennington, brought me in. And then I brought in a friend of mine. She's one of my 2 closest writer buddies, Linda Fair. And Linda Fair writes about the Ranchos Church here in Taos, and Glory writes about an actual train wreck she was in. So it's an amazing story. She emerges to see the stars, kind of half coherent, and decides to be a painter. So with these two friends kind of in tow, I'd say the next thing is that for the next volume, I'm thinking of other friends of mine, one in particular, a running buddy who's not yet published and who is a great storyteller. So at any rate, it's been fun. And one of the things I think I've loved about this is that every time I pick it up, I meet more of my own neighbors. It's interesting. I mean, there are folks from Denver and Utah and all over Tarnation, but I'm meeting friends of mine in Taos. I'm meeting people in Taos through reading more stories from the book. It's super diverse in that way, and I think that's been a lot of the fun of it.
Thank you. We didn't realize that the project was all about diversity of voice, and yet it is. And
oh yeah,
that's an amazing thing that we were so up to date in the manner of our collecting stories.
Yeah.
At first it was going to be artists and people of letters, and I thought, oh, just maybe 25 stories, small chapbook type of thing. And that's when it just started to grow. And I realized that I didn't want to exclude anybody, that I wanted to hear about everybody's story. And of course, as you said, Michelle, not everybody is a writer. And so when a person says, oh, I just can't do it, that's when I interview a person and we talk back and forth, and I make a Zoom, and then I literally transcribe their words into a story. For Eric Herrera, the Native American flutist, I actually went to his house and sat for 4 hours recording what he had to say. And then we go back and forth and agree that I have not put my voice onto the individual, but I have brought this forward, what that person wanted to say in their manner. And you mentioned Glory Pennington, who cannot be here today. And yes, she did experience a train wreck, but she also wrote herself about the Medina family out of Española and their extraordinary collection of lowriders. That was amazing. I subsequently spent all afternoon with the family, got to meet everybody from the 3-year-olds up to the grandmother. And they're quite incredible. And also Jim McDonald is here, who was one of Glory's mentors in her painting. And we'll hear from Jim after a little bit. But now, Marge, would you unmute yourself and tell us about your participating? Can you hear us? Marge, unmute yourself. There she is.
Okay.
First of all, I want to tell you that I may be the oldest person here, and I will got here. Sara was reading something out of my blog. I write a blog called Cranky Crone News, and it can either be very nice or it can be a rant. So read it. If some of it's good and some of it's like a painter. Every painter does not paint a masterpiece. Every writer does not write a masterpiece. Anyway, I write children's books. I write the blog. I write poetry. I write essays. Right. But the thing I want to tell you, I don't know who I'm talking with right now, so I'm going to pretend that most of you will be contributors to this next book. I'm hoping you will be. Because as we all know, having been through our public school systems, we know about Lilies, and we know about the Zebulon Pikes, and we know about Kit Carson, but we don't know about the real people of the West, and that's what we are. We're the people who built this place and keep it. I happen to be a third, one, two, three, yeah, a third generation, I think, Colorado native. My children are fourth generation, and my grandchild, I have one grandchild who is a fifth generation Colorado Westerner. So we have a long history of living in Colorado. And I think this is really important. You know, there was a time when personal narratives were really something treasured. Then they sort of fell out of context. I have a friend who's a doctor of geology. Is now they're coming back, which is I think is really good, and it's up to us to keep them going. And so my hope is that people who come to the West, they may not be natives like I, but they come for a reason. They may come from Ireland, as my postal man does. They may come from any other country, any other state in the Union, and they live here by choice, which is a great statement for Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, all of these places that we consider the West. I have to tell you, I don't consider California the West. It's coast. I don't consider Oregon, Washington, Idaho's up for grabs. But and Utah's sort of in the same situation. But all of these, particularly Rocky Mountain states, these to me, this is where we live. Okay. For a long time, I worked at in New Mexico. I was a volunteer, 20 years. I worked with the artist in residence. She taught me how to paint. These are things that people need to know. People need to know about my mother, who was born in 19. Her family came from Denver to Saguache County, and that's where they came in a covered wagon, folks. And, you know, this is history that we get to tell. If I don't tell this, then I will tell you what one of the contributors of the last book, this first book, said to me, a gentleman. He said, if Sara had not done what she did, only my grandchildren would know my story. And so we tell our story so that it's not just our grandchildren, but everybody knows this. When I approach somebody about writing for the next book, and they say, as you already said, oh, I can't write. I always say, yes, you can. You absolutely can. Sit down and talk to the paper. Just talk to the paper and see what you get. So fortunately, my dentist is going to write for us. My postal man is going to write for us. The man from God who picks up my trash is going to write for us. And it's up to us, those of us who contributed to the last book, and it's so wonderful to help other people be able to contribute to the new book and get their story told. And I realize another thousand hours for you, but it's important for another book to come out.
Thank you, Marge. Actually, it does. You mentioned your family coming in covered wagon. One of the first stories that I have received for book number 2 is a young woman from Latvia who shows up in Chicago, because that's the place where brides went to marry a rancher from the West. And she did indeed just do that. because he promised there was running water in the ranch house. Only it turns out that the running water was a mile down the hill and it had to be transported from the creek. So her expectations were not exactly fulfilled, but it's a hilarious story and they stuck with it for their entire lives. So the marriage was definitely a success.
One of my contributors, a little less hilarious, has written actually about the death of her father because he used Colorado's assisted suicide death law to take his own life. And she describes this. I never knew anyone until told me this story. I said, the world needs to know what you know and needs to know how it affected you and your and her dad. So it isn't just happy stories and historical stories, it's what's happening right now too that we need to tell about.
Exactly. And it seems like it's shaping up that a great many of the stories that I have hoped to receive for book number 2 have been of people who are indeed from other places. And Victoria, I'm hoping you may think of writing, you being from Colombia, and now you've been an American for well, probably the largest portion of your life so far. And that's a wonderful, wonderful story. And Corinne is going to talk about some of the Scottish heritage. I just finished my own story about the rancher lady, the late Tweet Kimball, who runs well, her ranch still does, Santa Gertrudis Shorthorn cattle in Sedalia, Colorado, and she happens to have been the owner of a medieval revival castle. And my experience as a 6th grader, the first time I was in her castle, and then later photographing her for the newspaper. So this is a wonderful thing. We want people from all walks of life, and that's of course what is in book number 1. Is that our rancher friend, actually a plumber friend, rancher from the Vale area, who was one of the first lead contractors on the Eisenhower Tunnel. And now he is a collector of motorcycles. And of course, we see all of them in the book, close to 100 of them in his barn. So that's another nugget of completely idiotic information. The idiotic part is about the parrot who arrived and was living in a non-heated cabin while they were beginning to work on the tunnel. So that you got to get the book to learn about that one. Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about poetry and your contribution? You've been so seminal in helping to get publicity out for both the current book and the new one. So do unmute yourself, please, and tell us about your involvement.
Wow. First, let me say to all of you who've been involved and will be involved, bravo. And look forward to working with you further. And Sara, of course, kudos that will keep coming in, we think. So Sara and I met at Lighthouse Writers Workshop working on our books, our poetry books. And I see Erica Walker here, and there are other Lighthouse people involved in this great project. And I think primarily I'm a poet. And the piece of mine, the poem of mine that's in the book has to do with the beetle kill trees that have just ravaged much of Colorado, southern Colorado, and then into northern New Mexico. And I was actually kayaking on Dillon Reservoir and looking at the trees as we went by the little islands there, and the red trees, the red pines contrasting with the aspen who have been spared, and poetry just seemed the right way to tell that story. So I'm pleased. There's a number of wonderful poems in the book, and I'm pleased to see that poetry can tell stories as well as a narrative.
Yeah, it was great to have your contribution. You actually, along with Jane Aiello, who is unfortunately not with us today, you two influenced me to include the poetry form, because that's as much a voice as any of the other things that we have had. And of course, some of the articles are quite long and take several pages. I see our good friend Dave Davis, who has emigrated. He has left us. He is now in the great state of Hawaii. But his work with Native Americans was one of the most beautiful of the illustrations in the book. They are just plain mouth-watering in their authenticity and the color, and how he became friends with so many, particularly of the Navajo, the Diné tribes in well, southern Utah, southern Arizona, and into New Mexico, and of course some of our good friends. Well, for instance, the Beale daughter and father, who are artisans of the Diné tribe, who wrote for the book also. Dad is, he is a painter, extraordinary, and his daughter is a bead artist, absolutely extraordinary in the quality of their work and the intricacy and finding out about it, and how the artisan in the Native American heritage is often almost inborn to people from these tribes, and something that we don't imagine, but it appears to be universal in their heritage. And Corinne, I want to ask you next if you would talk about you being the ultimate horsewoman here, and all your books, and your incredible outreach into Western literature in general, and how you started. Is it Writers of the West? Is that correct?
Writing the West. Wait, let me
Writing the
unmute. Hang on. Am I unmuted?
You're
Can you
good.
hear- Okay. Yeah. Oh, it's been a long ride, to use a pun, in that I started way back in about 1999, where I was working on that first novel that was also inspired by Tweed Kimball and Her Scottish Castle, and seemed a remarkable setting for a 19th century story about a cattlewoman. And the rest, as they say, is history. 20 years, and I've been developing that story into a trilogy. But to answer your question, early on in my career, I met the editor of the National Cowboy Museum magazine, Persimmon Hill, MJ Van Deventer. And we met at a conference, and she hired me to be a writer for this prestigious magazine located in Oklahoma City. And for 20 years, I flew to many of their important events, their annual art competitions and openings of great shows. I used to bill myself as the foreign correspondent, since I was the only one outside of Oklahoma who was there. And one thing led to another as I began to explore the West of present day and the frontier West, and produced 3 novels, a couple of children's books, and a coffee table book, so I can appreciate the genre of what you've done, about Western dinnerware, which, for those of you that have flipped through Unplugged Voices, that was my entry, was a summary of my love affair with a little known genre of popular culture the fact that the West is an evolving idea, both its horizon, its demographic, its landscape, and its values. And to think that artists across this country, from the potteries of Ohio to California, chose to depict Western ideas on a dinner plate. I mean, what could be more democratic than that? You could hang these plates on your wall, or you could eat off them or go to your favorite diner and find images of the Western expansion, of the rodeo cowboy, of Native Americans and all their stereotypical finery. And over 75 years, these images changed profoundly. And when I came upon it through an assignment for Western and English Today, at that point, I was writing for 5 different Western magazines: Persimmon Hill, True West, Western and English, ranching magazine called, never mind. The big news was that I took a look at this genre, and earlier it was branded as kitsch. You know what I mean? No one would be caught dead using it. But somehow, over time, it had become very chic and very collectible. So my goal was to explore this medium, and I set out with a humble, budget of maybe I'll spend $500 and pick up a few pieces. And in the end, I ended up with over 600 pieces of Western dinnerware. My goal was to assemble 5-piece place sittings of all the archival work. And I offered it to a couple of dinnerware publishers. They wouldn't touch it. But a Boulder publisher called Big Earth, who'd been around for 80 years, they loved it. And we turned it into a gorgeous coffee table book that included food, film, fashion, fabrics. And if you grew up in the 50s like I did, you were in the midst of the golden age of cowboy westerns. And who didn't have a Roy Rogers bedspread? I mean, And for the rest of us, all of that disappeared, but never to be very far away. As I said in the introduction of the book, like a long lost relative, we knew some gunman would come walking through the door someday, no longer in black and white, but in living color. And so this book, which sold over 5,000 copies, seemed to resonate with a lot of people who remembered the good old days. And so that's sort of my niche. And just to clarify, I'm not Scottish, but I mentioned to Sara yesterday that my research for my first novel about the Scots in the Rocky Mountain West left me with enough material to publish a significant book. And she and I both knew Tweed Kimball, obviously quite well. And my book is dedicated to her. So at any rate, that's a connection. Sara and I have many. And I'll stop right there because I feel like I've gone on too long. But that's my niche, Western world.
We all want to know how big your cupboard is that holds all the dinnerware.
4 rooms.
I took one piece off of her, which is a tiny child's mug that is emblazoned with little rabbit cartoons, and they're dressed either as cowboys with hats and horses, or as little Indians in the traditional sense, with a big headdress and bows and arrows and tomahawks. It's hilarious.
They're all so significant. They're works of art. If anybody's interested, I still have copies of the book, and it's a keeper. It's really remarkable.
By all means. Moving to something that is a more serious part of the West, namely history that could have been forgotten. John, tell us about your roles as a reenactor. So if you would unmute yourself. We met at the Tesoro Foundation's events at the Fort Restaurant here in Morrison, Colorado, outside of Denver. And I was always impressed with your regalia and the stories and the way you presented. So tell us about your contribution to the book, which was a very serious subject.
Well, I was at one of the volunteer dinners at the fort, um, given by the Tesoro Cultural Center, and this person walked up to me and said, "My name is Sara Frances. I'd like to make your acquaintance." So I'm like, "Okay, what's going on here?" And shortly I found out what you were working on, this book, and I thought, what could I possibly contribute? Because you had talked about New Mexico history, Western history. I'm from Ohio. I don't have a deep family connection to the West or to Colorado. In fact, when I came here, I knew nothing about Colorado history. I didn't even know Colorado had history. I thought, what? So through my participation, and I'm still a member of the first Colorado Volunteer Infantry reenacting or living history group. That's the first group I joined up with here. And then I joined up with the first Texas reenactment group. So I belong to a Union group and a Confederate group. I go both ways. And so that gave me an opportunity to participate in a lot of the national level reenactments like Gettysburg, the Wilderness, Antietam, and a lot of those. But it also gave me an opportunity to learn a lot about the Civil War in the West. What? Civil War in the West? So I learned about the participation of the Colorado troops in New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, Missouri, Kansas, really all over the western part of the United States. And it really broadened my knowledge and my understanding of what was going on here and why people were doing certain things politically and militarily. And so that's what led me to eventually write my book, Colorado and the Civil War, to kind of enlighten people about how big the participation of Colorado was here. But specifically for your book, I wrote about my participation in the reburial ceremony down in Santa Fe of about 30 Confederate soldiers who were killed at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, just southeast of Santa Fe in 1862 during the Civil War. And that was quite an emotional experience at the time. But also now I can look back and see at that time there was very little, there was no demonstration, there was no protest, there was no opposition to having these Confederate soldiers be buried in a national cemetery. Now, today, I can't imagine that would happen. And I just experienced the difference in people's outlook on that. We were down in Atlanta this last week, and we visited the Marietta, Georgia Confederate Cemetery, where there are several hundred Confederate soldiers buried there. There's a statue of a Confederate soldier, and on the flagpole, they fly a Confederate flag, two Confederate flags, two virgins. So quite a difference in the way and the outlook in which people look at Civil War from different parts of the country, different perspectives. Anyway, that was one of the interesting things about participating in these events with these Civil War groups. And although I'm too old to really represent military anymore, I still keep in touch with them and see what they're doing. So does that give you a little perspective on it?
Well, it does. That's one very serious way of contributing to this book. It's not all roses and champagne. There are things that we need to remember, and how we have evolved from one thing to the next, and we hope our perceptions of inclusivity and remembrance do not go so far as to eliminate or change history, just to suit ourselves. We want to learn from what was the past. And of course, that's part of what this grassroots short memoirs is all about. And at that point, I wanted to say that we're not making biographies of people. We're not making autobiographies. We're taking short episodes that give significant insight into character and just the ethos of the West in general. And that sounds kind of highfalutin, and it's not meant to be. It's meant to be stories that you would tell around the campfire, not a presentation, just something interesting that happened that should be part of the community knowledge. And a person who has been instrumental in this for years, I want to call upon Mr. Bill Wynn, my neighbor, who has been part of the Coors art exhibit with the National Western for a great many years, and part of the Petrie Center at the Art Museum of Western Art. And Bill has been a mine of information about interesting people. And Bill, tell us about your experiences as a promoter of art, I guess.
Well, thank you, Sarah. My experiences, particularly with your book and with you, have been most enjoyable. And this session, even today, tells stories that I haven't yet read in your first book. But I am an immigrant to Colorado, moving to Colorado in 1968 from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So a big cultural change, but I do have some ranching history prior to coming here, but I have joined mostly in the contemporary Western art genre with participation in the two organizations that you mentioned. 17 years with the Coors Western Art Advisory Committee, and some 20 years with the Contemporary Realist group at the Denver Art Museum that funded acquisition of Western art that is in the museum today. And then I had the pleasure of having Tim Newton, the publisher of Western Art and Architecture, as a house guest here for a couple of days, and introduced him to Sarah. His comment was that this book, the first book of Sarah's, was an important book, and he got rather excited about it. So I think I'll look back to him for maybe some suggestions on prospects for your next book. But that's pretty much my story. If there's questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, Mr. Newton is on my short list of people that I would like to have contribute to the volume 2, and of course, any suggestions he may have. And with that, let me segue to our artists on the panel. Jim McDonald, you have been so instrumental as a mentor of other artists in the West. And I loved your contribution, which has, it talks about the gold that Coronado missed. And it's a delightful story. So Jim, tell us about your involvement in what you do teaching people.
Well, just a couple of quick mentions. One, I want to throw a bouquet to you, Sarah, for what you're doing. Beyond that, I'm not sure what I could bring to the effort, but I would have a couple of things I would just like to share. I will soon be 82 years old, so I have a different perspective, perhaps a different timeline than some folks. One of the things I have noticed, which is, I think, unfortunate, is that we've lost the art of conversation. I recall what you're talking about, Sarah, stories told around the campfire. And I recall conversations where people would get together and the conversation would have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's almost a lost art at this point. If you listen to some of the conversations that go on in coffee shops and wherever, it's almost unintelligible. So I have a deep, abiding love for the entire planet. I have a particular affection for the Southwest. My first involvement with Taos, New Mexico was 1961, 62. I've spent a lot of time there. I lived there until I developed a lung problem and I had to move to a lower elevation. I have a pretty good sense of history, world history, but also more particularly American history. And when the gentleman was talking about the Battle of Glorieta, I'm very familiar with a lot of the Civil War action that happened there in Wagon Wheel and whatnot, Wagon Mountain. One thing I would throw in the mix, just as a suggestion, but one of the more accepted and enjoyable widespread forms of communication is music. And there are some extremely gifted musicians in New Mexico that would be fabulous. The one that comes to my mind is Bill Hearn, lives in Red River, and he and his wife Bonnie Hearn played for years. She passed several years ago, but Bill continues. He would be a rich resource for stories, I would think. Younger than that, there in Taos would be Jimmy Stadler, excellent musician, and music transcends all borders and boundaries. So he would have some good input. Also, a nephew of Bill Hearn is Richard Hearn, lives there in Taos, and he's the one that does the annual Big Barn Dance. He's a colorful fellow. Another one that comes to mind would be Tree Manon. He's the owner of Heritage Fine Art Gallery in Taos, New Mexico. From a more personal standpoint, I have good memory of stories that my father told me. He was born in 1916. There's a huge recession at that point. So he rode the rods around the country. He was a hobo. And he, in particular, as it relates to New Mexico, he told me several stories about when he was grifting through New Mexico, and he would do anything to make $1 within reason. But he, for an example, told me a story about he got into a pretty high stake poker game in Lordsburg, and he escaped on a train leaving Lordsburg. But there are lots of and more stories from him, that involve New Mexico and the West. One of the things he did, for an example, to get a buck, he would go into a small town like Silver City, and he would negotiate a deal with the local grocery store. He would paint the grocery specials on the inside of the window backwards, so from the outside you could see, lettuce, it's 3 heads for a nickel. So he got to be quite a good artist throughout that area, going from one small town grocery store to the next. I've shared this, I think, with Sara before, but my affection for the Southwest and Taos in particular is I have a lot of history there, but it's painful to see tradition and storytelling being lost. And so I really salute Sara and what she's doing, and so many others of you good people, what you're doing to keep the art of storytelling alive. If we lose our heritage, we lose our culture. If we lose our culture, we lose our values. If we lose our values, we lose our civilization. It's a linear progression. So, Sara, anything I can do with my limited resources to help the effort, please let me know, and I'd be more than pleased to do it. So.
Well, that soundbite that you just made, that's the whole purpose of all of this. And I think it is, I consider it, to me, a great privilege to be able to suddenly do this after 50 years of commercial photography, to move into this sideways profession. It's a totally new thing for me. It's taken me 10 years to learn this publishing business, and to have fallen into the grace of these stories that have unfolded around me. This is an amazing privilege. And moving from your experience that you have just shared with us, Jim, and it sounds like I'd like to hear about hobos for the new book. I think that would be wonderful.
Well, there was a very complete culture or network throughout this entire country of hobos. They had their own vocabulary, their own signals. So a hobo could walk down the road, see a mailbox with a marking on it. He would know what that marking meant.
Exactly, whether it was a friendly place or whether to
Yeah.
avoid knocking on the door.
You
Precisely.
And you get a feel for work, you know, that kind of a thing. So. But again, I think what we're talking about here is beyond armchair interest. I think it's critical. It really is critical. We've got 8 billion plus people on the planet now. We must do everything we can to maintain civility, and that starts with understanding.
Well, there's another artist here who I am hoping we will finalize an article for the new book, and that's Nicholas. And his experience on Route 66 is not exactly a hobo, because he came here with great conscience and with delight. And his pastel art, we are going to show off, of diners from Route 66. Nicholas is a very self-effacing gentleman who likes the simplicity of life, but he has graciously agreed to contribute. Nicholas, tell us a few words about your procedure of or your process, or is it your path of getting to the West and being literally a neighbor on Route 66?
Sure. First of all, I'm from Chicago originally, raised in northern Illinois, a small suburb. And I wanted to mention the mystique that you talked about of the West. Living in the Midwest, and then like later going back to the East when I worked for Kodak and trained in Rochester, New York, it seemed that people didn't even realize there was something beyond the Mississippi River. It reminded me of where you see these science fiction movies where the earth falls off on the other side. They didn't know what the West was. And it was just fascinating to live out here and know the culture and everything about it. So eventually moving through, I lived in Colorado, Greeley, Colorado for 20 years, then moved down to Edgewood, New Mexico now. And I've lived here for 27 years. But I live right on Route 66. So the mystique of Route 66 is what I'm hoping we can convey in the article. And I'm honored to be part of the second book.
Well, your art that you are permitting us to publish is so beautiful and so, well, it's most extraordinary. It's not chalk smudged with a finger. This is an absolutely extraordinary piece of art, and I can't wait to have it in a full spread in the book. And moving from that, Carolyn, will you unmute yourself? Because by rights, we should have spoken to you first, as you are the lead story in the book, namely about living in a a cast off adobe shack, really, barn. I don't even know what you would call that, and how your parents love to restore adobe, and you grew up this way of always being in process with the earth. You're still muted, Carolyn. We can't hear you. There you are.
I'm here?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, good. Something's going wonky. Anyway, hi. Yeah, it was a real pleasure working on the first volume, and I wrote 3 pieces. They were kind of timeless introspection. I loved writing about interaction with place and with memory. I'm sorry, what was your question? I was having technical trouble.
Just that we started the first book of domiciles literally rising from the earth, made out of adobe. And
Right.
you went on to speak in your other 2 articles about the luscious taste of apricots from
Yes.
New Mexico that brought back memories that are so delicious that we can taste them in your article. And then talking about the turquoise road
Right.
is so characteristic of not just the Native Americans, but everything in the Southwest. Turquoise is a big deal. And of course, it figures on the cover of,
Yeah.
of the current book. So
Mhm.
really, what I was hoping you would speak about was the rising from the earth in the adobe style.
Rising from the earth. Wow. I'm not sure I get what you're asking. You want me to talk about adobe construction? I'm sorry.
Sure, because that's something you learned from Anita Rodriguez and others.
True. Yes, 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 yes. Well, adobe is a true love of mine, and yeah, I worked with Anita and Sam Arnold at Fort on the Orno there, which is now gone. I'm not exactly sure why it got taken down, but it was taken down some years ago. Anita was giving a workshop in Boulder on building adobe fireplaces. And I was like, I have to take that class. And so I talked to Anita, and the price was rather high. And I said, well, what can I do to, defer the cost? And so she asked me if I would get together a group that could come to my house, because she had no other place, to give a slideshow on her travels in Egypt and her work with Assam Fathi, who wrote Architecture for the Poor. And it just was like, it was just such synchronicity in my life. It was amazing. And I remember calling Sam Arnold and just asking if he knew of any, a friend of ours, I'm sorry, told me to call Sam Arnold. And so it was just like all of this stuff came together. So like that was an emergence from earth. It was because of it, my love for adobe, that the Orno even happened at the Fort. Sam asked me if, well, she's here, can she build us an Orno? And I said, well, I have no idea. So now I have reason to call Anita and to offer her something. And so I offered her this job opportunity, and she said, sure, if he gets the adobes there, I'll give him some names and phone numbers from, I think it was from San Pueblo. And so took this class with her, and she couldn't stand the women that she was working for. So she asked if she could stay at our house. So it was just a very organic process that was extremely exciting for me. And I don't know, I feel like I'm babbling.
You told exactly what I was interested in.
Okay.
Thank you. It just revisiting, re-upping the things that we do in the West to survive. How Adobe is made. I mean, that's a major thing. Talk to somebody
Yeah.
from Maine about that, and they probably would say, what?
No, but the interesting thing is that the people have used quotes Adobe. Adobe Peace and Cobb was a book that I stumbled upon years ago. It was published in the 50s, and the use of Adobe is worldwide. I mean, it's the earth is there as long as you have water and fairly good balance of sand and silt and many times straw uh, or some other woody material. It's just really quite interesting that it's a universal, building material, and it's very, very grounding to live in an empty home. It's work, there's a lot of maintenance, but
I have a question about volume 2, Sarah. Can you just tell the group, is the geography more expansive, or is it really centered on, again, Colorado, the West, and the mountains?
Well, we don't exactly know because it's a work in progress, evolving. Yes, we have things like Cecilia's lady who came from Latvia. That's Montana. We have an artist who works in a corporate or public art, and he is now his big workshop is in Sonoma. So we have moved a little bit into California, even though that's not really the West, but where he has worked. His primary job, if you will, has been the creation, literally the recreation of the entire airport in Salt Lake City. And what he did to make the art of the airport an experience of the nature of the West. Fascinating. We're talking about the entire plan of the redoing of the airport was something like $6 billion, and his portion of it was an eye-jobbing figure, and it's almost complete. It's been working for a great many years to get it done. So we have some things that are a little bit farther afield. I'm talking to a cowboy poet from Nebraska tomorrow who also runs cattle. And so his story, I hope for some poetry, of course, that will go with Corinne's story about Tweet Walker and my story about Tweet Walker. And we have two other rancher stories that are coming together. And so we are a little bit farther afield. It's not just New Mexico, Colorado, Four Corners. We're expanding our scope. And so it may be Unplugged Western Voices. It may be Unplugged Rocky Mountain Voices. I'm not quite sure what's going to be right. But, and then actually I'm talking to another New Mexico artist, Ted Cox, who is very much a traditionalist of his cowboy portrayals. And so we will still have the idea of a map on the front cover of the book, probably of the Continental Divide. And then that's kind of what I envision at the moment. But now there's something we haven't talked about that is kind of hilarious about the West. And that calls upon Ella to tell us about her amazing artwork, photographic artwork that is really not photographs. And I don't even know what to call it, but they are little aliens. And New Mexico is a hotbed of UFOs and aliens. And how did you come to contribute this extraordinary little person? them,
right up here.
whatever, with antenna and bubblings and
Yes, yes. Our best friends from college moved to New Mexico about 25 years ago. So we go out and visit them quite often and stay for quite a while. And I've been working on an alien project since about 2014, 15, where I started creating aliens from everyday items, such as a bowl of yogurt with chia seeds, all the way to like an antique car bumper, that kind of thing. Ordinary things that we see around us all the time, basically, and making these crazy aliens out of them. So Sarah saw some of my work, and because of the connection with UFOs, it was lovely enough to include one of my pieces in there, which I very much appreciate. This was actually created during the week of our best friend's son's wedding. So it was very much connected to Western culture at that point, since he got married in the West as well. And it's just a part of, I wanted the theme of the work to be, we are different in so many ways, but down to the base of us, we're all basically coming from the same place, the same material, the same everyday values and what we want. We have the same wishes for our families, for our lives. And, regardless of what we're seeing as big political differences now, at the base of it, we all want our families to be safe and happy and live good lives. And that's part of the theme of the whole thing. And I've made a lot of aliens over these last few years, and it's been a lot of fun. I've gotten a lot of notice for them, and I'm just delighted to be included in the book.
thank you, Ella. That your work provided such a counterpoint of some of the more serious issues that were brought up, like John Steinley's experiences. And so not everything is happy, happy. There are funny things, there are sad things. There are several memorials of people who have passed, particularly of our longtime friend Jim Wagner, the artist. And so we just want a whole collection of stories that otherwise would never get told. And Samantha, that's where you come in. Jim was talking about music and all of these other items that are so Western in character, and you being part of you call yourself an extra on films, but as an actress and with your extraordinary outreach to other artists and musicians, I'm hoping you can help provide half a dozen stories among your friends.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been kind of reaching out to a few people, and I hope that you were able to connect with the few that I sent so far. So I try to give a variety. It was nice to connect with you. Of course, you're friends with my mom in Colorado, which is lovely, and that's how we met, of course. And I grew up in Colorado, and now I'm in New Mexico doing background acting work. So you might all know that as extra. So it's the performative side of the arts, as you all know, but it's the reason I got into it was, of course, we used to own the American Budo Judo College in Denver. And because I come from a martial arts background, what do you do with an arts degree and martial arts background? And all the jobs just like seem to have disappeared overnight during the time that the marijuana industry moved in. So then, of course, my now husband, but boyfriend at the time, I said, do you want to just run away with me and be an actor in New Mexico? And he's like, okay, let's do it. So we came here, and one of the best ways to get into the film industry is you start as a background extra. You start on the ground floor. I guess it's the mailroom, if you will, of the Hollywood industry. And that's what I did. I did also do a lot of indie film with Stutz because that is my background. But what the main thing is, when you go to a film set and you get cast as a background extra, you get to meet so many different people from all walks of life. My husband and I call it speed friending. So you get in the background holding, and you have just all these different people, and you don't know you don't know where they're from. Some people come from other states. Some people, I've met a rocket scientist that works at Sandia Labs. I've met an attorney, and she's practicing law still, but does acting on the side. I've met a research scientist, PhD and all, and she was actually even pulled to do a speaking role on a film series I can't talk about because it's still filming, but it's let's just say it's like very going to be very well known. And so yeah, there's like it's still the Wild West here in New Mexico, and things like rust still happen. So I was on the film set the day before the tragedy that Alec Baldwin accidentally shot and killed his cinematographer. And the reason that, of course, all happened was because negligence and, well, also lowballing. I think that's the key thing here. You get what you pay for. And he and his other producers didn't pick the highest, well, let's just say the contracts were that they picked the person that they didn't have to pay as much. So I think that's kind of a lesson that they had to learn the hard way, is that when these Hollywood productions come to New Mexico, think that they can do it cheaper. And well, there's some repercussions to that. So my hope is that I can, now that I have a better understanding of the breadth of what's to come for the second book, I can hopefully get my connection through people that I've met here to have a story that would co-align with the intent of this next publication. Because, I mean, a couple of people have said this, is that it's so important to have the tangible, book now. Because, I mean, yes, you can read, testimony and story and everything on the internet, but I still think it's nice to have that concrete, physical form of it. Because, well, my bias is that I worked for the CU Denver newspaper when it was called The Advocate. So I was going to go into newspaper and such. So unfortunately, Rocky Mountain News closed before I could apply. But I think that having this, just a tangible writing in your hand does help, especially as a coffee table book too. It's a nice decorative piece as well as something that you can read. So I always like that element of having a collectible item, if you will, to just have in your possession a part of your own history within your own, living room. Like your living room, everybody's living rooms, they have a story to tell as well. And you kind of look through what, all the things you've collected. And I think having something like this coffee table book will just be like, I remember doing that. That was a good monumental moment. So, but yeah, just I will keep sending you people, Sarah, and if you come up with a specific theme and just ask me or my mother might know somebody. And we'll do our best to keep feeding people your way.
That sounds great. And this is a good point as we're nearing the end here to mention that while existing authors obviously can still buy the books at wholesale for their own use, if you have friends who would like a book, on my website, that's photomirage.com/store, there is a 20% special. And if people would like one, naturally, because my husband and I funded the printing of this extraordinary book ourselves, naturally, we want to sell those to recoup the cost of the printing, which then will be rolled directly over into the printing of the next book. I don't get anything for this. My 3,000 hours, that's just my fun and my delight as a second career to be able to do this and to showcase people. And I before we end up, I would love to hear something from Terry and Victoria. Terry, we haven't been known to each other, but you are an agent for authors. And I was hoping that you might just spend a moment and tell about your agency and who you represent.
Thank you. I don't even know what to say. My name is Terry Wolf. I'm at AKA Literary Management. I represent, actually, I found out about this event today through Corinne Brown, who's one of my agents. I'm sorry, one of my clients. And we've been working together on Books of the West. That's just the best way to explain it. I am a fifth generation Coloradan. I lived longer in Europe than I have in Colorado. But my family are ranchers and firefighters and teachers and authors. And I'm just glad to be here. If you have any other questions, I can ask and answer them.
Thank you, Terry. That's plenty. We would love to have you, if you have advice or you'd love to give us pointers, gratefully accepted. That's what we're all about here. Vicki, tell us about your experience coming from Colombia. We can't hear you. Nope.
It's the little button on the
There.
lower left. Mm.
Maybe it's a Bluetooth speaker or something that might be connected.
Vicki, fiddle with it for a minute and let's talk to Dave Davis while you're seeing if you can fix the sound from a long ways away. Mr. Dave.
Well, actually, I'm in Colorado right now, so I'm a little bit closer. We're in the middle of moving again, so yeah, I don't even know where to start. Too many stories and I guess not enough time. But I don't know, listening to everybody else, I guess I'm needing some guidance on where to focus and who to refer to you for this next book.
You know, it is such an eclectic collection. I never know where things are going to go. So it's perfectly acceptable for any profession, any idea that you want to put forward. Some of the most extraordinary things came from sources that I would never imagine, like the lady who makes hats, who is near Dillon. And she wanders all over the place making these extraordinary collections. Honestly, she should have been in Great Britain for the coronations and the superb hats, because I think she does a better job than some of the things we saw on TV. So that's one I had never imagined. The husband and wife who were burned out in the Marshall fires and
Right.
watched their house burn. That's an extraordinary story. They have just finally recouped their home and have rebuilt and have a lovely new house, but it's taken forever, or it seemed like it has. Story from the local Anglican church, who happens to own a set of stained glass windows, the likes of which I have never seen anything like it. They are sculptural. They have thickness to them, and they're very contemporary and very Western in their styling. Scriptural, of course, as you might guess, but I've never experienced anything in any cathedral anywhere that looks like this. Of course, the rancher from Albuquerque, whose husband is, he's a horse rancher, he chases Mustangs and names them. That was a very important thing. The extraordinary stories from Jerry de la Cruz, a local artist who works with primarily found objects and creates dimensional collages and sculpture out of them, oftentimes as extraordinary and funny as Ella's little alien creations. I'm so pleased to know these people. I mean, they're such an illumination to my life. So maybe I am the one on the really gaining end of this stick.
Sarah, could I bring up the question I asked you yesterday that I
Oh.
think everyone could benefit from, which is I asked whether or not these individuals needed to be writers. What if they weren't able to really tell their story? And she encouraged that any one of us that is a writer, we could offer to be their ghostwriter or do an interview and package that story so Sarah could take it over and make it fit her word count or layout or whatever. So I think that's an interesting option. You don't need to find people that are necessarily writers, just individuals who are a part of this amazing Western world.
And Samantha, that might be something that you could do if you found people who really were somewhat retiring in their ability or desire to put words on paper. Marge said it best. You talk to the paper, but you might be able, and then of course what it would be is so-and-so's story as told to you. And then of course I and the editorial staff, which includes Marge and Andrea, who were here before, and of course Jane Aiello, and Linda Engel, who wasn't able to be here also today. You know, they're all my helpers to make sure that we've got our proper styling and we have our punctuation in the right place, and we try not to have errors of spelling, those things. So yes, that'd be possible. Be a wonderful idea. Thanks, Corinne. Vicki, did you get your sound? Oh, it still doesn't work. We can't hear you. Well, nevertheless, then I will tell you, Victoria has had a checkered career from South America and has lived all over the place with her late husband, or I should say former husband, and has worked in my photographic studio for a long time as a valued person. And I can't wait to hear what she has to say about being an import. And her story will go along with another story of an immigrant who is from Peru, who married a good friend of my brother's and now lives in half-time in Las Vegas and half-time in Colorado, and how they brought the Peruvian customs into their family. So we've got a whole bunch of things. And so as we're really wrapping up here, may I remind people, first of all, if you have friends who want a book, tell them to go to my website, not Amazon, because that will be the higher pricing. And I will be sending around some suggestions to have little posts of review on Goodreads and of course on Amazon too, which will be a tremendous help to promote interest in the book. And of course, anybody that wants to suggest someone to be part of book two, we are most graciously accepting your ideas. So with that, Wendy, do you have any more thoughts or questions that we should finalize?
Just thanking everyone for joining and staying the course and contributing. I think it's been really helpful. And I have reasons to go back and reread parts of the book too, from just seeing some faces here today and wanting to know more about their stories. So thank you.
Could I add a closing remark? That I would like Jim McDonald to reiterate his philosophy of the written word as a manifesto to save civilization through publishing. God bless you. It's a challenge, Jim.
Pardon? Say it again, please.
I just thought that what you offered today was brilliant and really resonates with all of us writers. And I'm suggesting you type it up as a sort of manifesto to save the future through the written word.
Yeah, is manifesto a good word for it?
In a good way.
That could go either way, you know.
Declaration. How's that?
Yeah, I'd be pleased to do that. And should I forward that
Submit
to you,
it to Sarah for the next book.
Yes.
It could be the foreword to the new book.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could well be.
The dedication.
I'm hoping that Jim Walsh will write either the foreword or the introduction to book number 2. He teaches at Auraria. And while his heritage is Irish, his greatest love is these verbal narratives, these experiential stories that are such a great part of the history. Jim, can you repeat how you said that saving these little stories, how it saves civilization? Do you remember what you said?
Well, I'll get the best I can of it, but the whole concept is that there was a time that conversations between people had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
We've lost that now. We go toward brevity, and we go through LOL and all this other stuff. And I think what I was saying, and this has been recorded, so you can go back and find it for sure. But if we lose the art and the civility of storytelling, then we really risk losing local culture. If we lose the local culture, we're going to lose civility. And if we lose civility, we'll all be damned. That's a paraphrase of it. But and again, I don't have much to add to this group, but I do have an absolute enduring, abiding love for the planet. And I think we're all guests here. And it'd be nice if everyone would behave like a guest, and be nice to each other. So, but if you want, Sarah, I'll write down some doggerel.
I would love it. I would love it. But Jim, this is where we have to end because you said it all. And so may I thank everyone for coming. A few people had to go to other obligations, but this has been wonderful. And the recording will soon be available that you can call attention to it on my YouTube channel to other people who weren't able to attend today. So again, thank you. And Wendy, any last word?
Just thanks, and let's do it again.
We need another book. We'll get to it.
We'll look forward.
Bye-bye, all.
Sarah, thank you
Thank
for
you,
all your
Sarah.
efforts. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Adios.